Good evening, Tom. I'm really looking forward to discuss about this very complex and famous case. I think that in the field of money laundering, this has been like a really talked about and I think an extremely complex case. And I'm really happy that we have you discussing this because, I know that you've been very closely connected with this in many ways. And with your extensive experience and your knowledge in this field, I'm absolutely excited. I know it's a very long, very complex, but I'm sure that, we can discuss the case as you have, prepared.
Okay, well, happy to do so. I do find it a fascinating case, and as we go through it, hopefully the audience will share the fascination. Um, what I'd like to do in this particular module, and we have quite a few different modules that'll break it down into different perspectives. This one is purely sort of an overview and just why even bother studying the 1MDB case, which is probably where we should start. Just by way of background, most of the audience probably already knows this, but 1MDB was a Malaysian state-owned development corporation, state-owned enterprise. Some people say a sovereign wealth fund, but that's actually not precise. It was a development fund that was supposed to be generating income, through its investments. And it had a stated purpose of both strategic investment for the country of Malaysia, as well as to alleviate poverty. That's what the public view was. In reality, what happened was it was set up from the very, very beginning with a lot of co-conspirators as a pure vehicle for embezzlement. So it's important to keep in mind as we go through this that the 1MDB as an enterprise was really set up for the purpose of embezzling, and everything that they were doing was really part of a fraud. Now, I think part of the audience would say, well, is that particularly useful to study? And the answer is yes, for reasons that we'll discuss in a couple of slides. It really does present, number one, the life cycle of frauds, particularly when we consider grand corruption, which is the highest portion of the government. But then the way that it unfolded over more than a decade, there was really many case studies on each of the banks that handled it, each of the customer types, each of the products. And so by unbundling the 1MDB case, it really does help, particularly the practitioners of AML in banks, understand why do we do what we do and how can we do it better. I do want to emphasize this is designed for practitioners in banks on how to detect this stuff in real time.
Sure. And I'm sure that it's going to be extremely valuable for all the practitioners and, participants.
Just some reasons why we would study the MDB case. One is, as just about everyone knows, there was a tremendous amount of money involved. In fact, when you look at both the US dollar and the non-US dollar transactions, which were split about 50-50, as well as the opportunity cost, there was over 10 billion that was stolen. And it occurred over 10 years. In fact, you could make an argument that it is still continuing even as we speak. And then from an AML practitioner perspective, it provides all of the areas that we would normally look at from trying to set up a program. Jolo, the mastermind, and his conspirators used an infinite number of techniques to launder money. And by studying those techniques, it very much helps us with pattern recognition, much as the way that maybe a chess player would study grandmaster games to learn. Uh, from a banking product perspective, they use quite a few different banking products, including cross-border wires, domestic wires, checks, credit cards, cash, virtually all of the products, loans, investment banking, credit, other credit vehicles. So they use just about any bank product that you can think of. The other thing was they have quite a few different geographies, whether it's the domestic Malaysian economy, whether it is offshore financial centers, major centers like the US or Singapore. They had a wide variety of geographies, all sorts of customer types, including PEPs, state-owned enterprises, brokers, construction companies, uh, uh, investment companies like Goldman Sachs. And then there's a lot of individual people, particularly high net worth individuals, that would have been in the KYC that the banks would have been looking at as well. The other thing that I think makes 1MDB very useful as a case study is it has been deconstructed from every single way that you could think of. Early on, the U.S. Department of Justice had a very prominent civil forfeiture action that traced money, from the actual embezzlement all the way through the assets. Probably talking about 50 different assets. There was criminal actions here in the United States, some that actually went to trial, others that there was a lot of information in the legal pleadings, but were subject to a guilty plea. And then there was quite a bit of civil litigation here in the United States. Perhaps more importantly, from my perspective, there was a lot of litigation outside of the United States, particularly Malaysia and Singapore. And those cases had hundreds of witnesses. Virtually every case went to trial. Some of the trials, went on for months and months and months. And interesting from my perspective was most of the Malaysian and Singapore trials involved non-USD transactions. So it wasn't unduly parochial to the US financial system. It shows what happens, in a domestic or a neighboring country that doesn't have the same kind of regulatory structure that the US had. In addition, because of kind of the egregiousness of the case, because of the amount of money, that sort of thing, there was all sorts of coverage on it, including a best-selling book by two Wall Street Journal reporters called The $1 Billion Whale. There has been thousands of articles in newspapers around the world. There's been global regulatory actions in at least 6 different countries. And we've had a lot of time that's gone by. There's been over 15 years that has gone by since the very first wrongdoing, which has given all the legal systems time to play out. And there's a tremendous amount of raw data that's out there. One of the interesting side things was one of the employees of the co-conspirators actually took all the servers of one of the major conspirators and sold it to a newspaper. So we have lots of raw emails, lots of recorded calls from the banks, all sorts of tracing of money and that sort of thing.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. It's good that you mentioned, because I was very curious that, why did you study this 1MBD case? I mean, of course, it's a very famous one, but it's just so vast. So some of the things that you've just shared, definitely answers my question. But if there are any particular thing like, that you still like to mention on why did you study this?
Well, I do want to get into the major presentation, but just to finish the thought, almost all of the stuff that was involved with the reconstruction of it involved bank AML programs. We had the bankers who are testifying what they did. In many cases, we have bankers going to jail. We have the regulators themselves coming under scrutiny. And the other thing was, it was very much a developing economy environment. So I think it has broad application to AML programs all around the world, not just to a mature economy. And then at the end of the day, it's just a fascinating people story. One of the things, there have been several people here that, no one knows for sure, but there were certainly tended to be people that died or were killed at very suspicious times on this.
Right.
We'll be talking about Jolo in depth, really, through all of these slides. But before we get started, I just wanted to give an overview of who he is and really how he was groomed almost from birth, to commit a fraud like this, because it was very much a family operation as far as what they did. So one of the stunning things to me when you look at this case study was just how young Jolo was when he started.
Absolutely.
He was in his 20s when he stole his first $1 billion. And actually, he was caught by the time he was in his mid 30s. And it wasn't an accident that that he got into that position. But by the same token, he wasn't born into that position. It wasn't like he was born into a fabulously wealthy family or an unusually politically connected family. What happened was his family came from upper middle class Malaysia.
Mhm.
His father very much wanted him and his two siblings to meet very influential people, and spent quite a bit of money to ensure that they did. So when he was in high school, his father sent him to London to go to school. His father rented an apartment there in an area where other Malaysians and people from the Middle East were, so that he could meet them in high school. And then, had him educated in the United States at Wharton, and then financed a lifestyle at Wharton where he was almost, from the very beginning, wining and dining politically influential people. One example was his father gave him $40,000 to throw himself a birthday party
Wow.
just to meet people. And then in breaks from class, he would either travel to the Middle East with his classmates, or he'd invite his classmates to Malaysia, where he once again would create this illusion that he was very wealthy and very politically influential, when it was a complete fabrication. And then when he
Right.
got out of Wharton, he came back to Malaysia, had several stumbling steps, including, losing his lease on his first office, had some unsuccessful ventures, but also had some successful ventures. And he was collecting co-conspirators along the way, and he was also corrupting politically influential people, including people that were associated with the regulatory environment.
Right.
Uh,
If I
he
can
had,
stop you for a second,
sure,
I'm very curious, Tom. So did he have the whole thing sorted out, or he just, he designed it as he moved on?
no, he very much was designing it as he was moving on.
Mm,
But what he did always want to do was, he was fascinated by sovereign wealth funds and by these development funds. So he saw what happened in the Middle East with some of their more established wealth funds, and he always wanted that.
mhm.
Uh, he didn't really know quite how to do it, and he had several unsuccessful attempts to try to do it. But he was always modeling it on the sovereign wealth funds out of the Middle
Mm,
East.
I see. Interesting.
Um, He also started with some rather conventional businesses, such as construction companies, public works projects, um, floating bonds for construction projects, that sort of thing.
Some
And
tangible.
then as he got more sophisticated, as he got more influential conspirators, he eventually went through several phases, starting in 2009, going up through 2014 and 2015, where um, he went through several major embezzlements that were primarily the US dollar transactions. But then at the very end, when that was collapsing around him, he got very involved with the Chinese government, with the Middle Eastern government in non-US dollar transactions, and came very close actually to getting away with the whole thing.
Wow.
One of the amazing things is you think, well, how does someone think they can get away with it? He came very close to getting away with it, and but for the fact that the negative press caused the prime minister to lose an election, and the new government came in and intervened, he may have been able to get away with it.
Sure. So this is great. I mean, you have the whole story, like, the timeline, and it's so interesting how it developed, and then, the challenges. So it's all in one. It's like a bird view, but again, the micro information is also there.
Well, I will say a lot of these things are individual modules. So why don't we go to the next slide,
Yes,
and I'll give a
absolutely.
different view of it, and then eventually we'll talk about the different modules.